Welcome to Promote Profit Publish. I'm your host, Juliette Clark. And today, this training's a little bit different because every entrepreneur needs good nutrition to keep themselves going, especially in really stressful times. You need to be getting your butt out there and getting some exercise and eating right. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't eat right. So, wanted to remind you about our new tours before we jump into this today. We have very reasonably priced podcast, radio, and print tours out there for people who are either building their platform or their book is coming out or already out. And we have guys that actually read the book. If you look at most of these booking places, they don't read your book, they put you with their friends. These guys cultivate podcast and radio shows that are in alignment with your book and your business and what you do. So much, much more effective. So reach out to me, chatwithjuliette.com if you want to discuss and see if it's right for you. Today's guest is Karie Cassell, and Karie brings Nourish to Flourish message to us as a sought after speaker and #1 bestselling author of the Domino Diet, How to Heal You from the Inside Out, combining her life coach certification, alternative and non-alternative medicine. As a dietitian for 30 years, Karie's unique formula unlocks patterns of self-sabotage while putting the heal back in health. Look for her soon to be released courses, the Domino Diet Formula and Cracking the Craving Code for your full spectrum well-being. So, Linda made it. I was just going to have to email her. So welcome, Karie. I'm so excited to have you. You guys, I'm a sugar whore. And that's probably a horrible thing to say. But when Karie and I were working on her book, I actually quit sugar altogether for 4 months. And it was amazing that I went through withdrawals. Like, I know they say it's like heroin. I literally went through withdrawals. I needed, Betty Ford for sugar addiction. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with these guys today about how to avoid being me.
Well, we all want to be you. Why would you say that?
I'm sure you all do.
You're probably going golfing after. Who doesn't want to be doing that?
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah, busted. So
All
Karie,
right.
what do you have to share with us today?
I'm going to take you to the root, I guess we'll say. And I'm going to take you through. I just did a TED talk, and the topic kind of cultivated a lot of curiosity. So I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to kind of show you a smattering of what it's like to be a dietitian and a life coach. It's kind of a different background altogether. And I'm going to share slides here in a moment. I don't know if I'm co-host that I can pin myself or how that's all looking on your end, but one moment while I do that technology. And are you familiar with the luck that I have, which is I have to hit it twice, it seems. So let's just see if that's the case. No, you must see some slides now, right? I'm a different kind of a thinker. I've been a dietitian for 30 years. I've been in alternative medicine for 10 years prior to that. So altogether, 40 years in wellness. The number keeps on growing. I keep saying that number. It must have grown by this point, but I'm going to keep saying it because it already makes me feel older and I want to. Nonetheless, the topic I've been spinning around is that there's a greater side of emotional eating. And that's obviously piquing some curiosity because it's usually a negative connotation. And so my hopes are to talk about this idea of we are creating our results by how we think. So if we have negative connotations around our food, if we have negative belief systems in our thought process, we're probably going to create sabotage at the end of the day. So how to extract some of that out? And of course, I'm going to keep it to 50 minutes, ideally, in case there's questions. But in that length of time, how do you really go to the depth of things? But sometimes there's these little common thoughts that we all have as our human society walking this planet, or at least we've been privy to. And I hope to kind of extract some of that so that we can feel it also resonating within us. Because you've been around maybe for a little bit, just guessing by a couple faces here. Maybe you have seen the planet for a little while. And I have a couple of resources I'll mention, how to get in touch with me and all that. But really, it is really a passionate place for me to have people see the message around food, not as your friend necessarily, more as the fuel and healing first. And then, yes, for celebration as well. That's a passion for me, whether or not, we're all trying to make a living too. But I have been to a place in my life before where it felt like the writing of a book or some of these endeavors were on behalf of wealth. But I've also learned that it takes away from my true passion, which is completely helping people heal from the inside out. So that's actually the subtitle of my book, The Domino Diet. I mentioned that I'm a dietitian for a long time. It feels like I have been really fortunate. I've sat in some pretty cool places in my career. You know, the board of director of the Canadian Diabetes Association. I'm currently the media network chairperson for Dietitians of Canada. And yada, yada, yada. That sounds maybe good, or maybe it doesn't too. But the point for me to say that is, yes, there might be some credibility coming from that academic side, even though I would tell you I'm not really strong academically. What really began to catapult my learning was through the personal trials and tribulations, to the point where I began to see that there was more of a battle going on between the macronutrients and the nutrients that I had been studying. So here I was at 13 years of age, reading the Nutritional Almanac book. I thought it was normal, to be honest with you. And I was reading it instead of Vogue magazine. And I would look around and think that that was just the way everybody was. I hit a biology 30 class and I was able to answer these questions, which, believe me, I'm telling you, I was not strong academically. But here I am answering these questions about vitamin A and vitamin C. And my girlfriend behind me, who knew I'm not strong academically, she said, "How do you know all this?" And I seriously looked at her and went, "How do you not know this?" So what I'm saying to you is that I had this draw to want to understand food and passionate about it, as I mentioned. And I began in the 80s when carbohydrates were the best. Okay, we're talking about seeing carb up powders. Protein powders, by the way, were sold in these packages like brown sugar is today, where they're little plastic bags, nothing fancy about them at the time. So carbohydrates were the best in the 80s. And then came the 90s and it was fat. Fat was the best. And then halfway through that decade, they weren't good anymore. It started off with cold press oils, omega-3s, and people were drinking olive oil. I do remember that. Halfway through, now fats were bad, and we now have low-fat diet products that littered the grocery stores and changed the way we shelf, like the way we actually see marketing going on in our grocery stores. It's never looked the same again. And then came, where's the beef? And then proteins took their turn. So I watched the battle of these macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, duking it out for the spotlight. You had to hate one to love the other. And I was so perplexed because I had been studying these. I knew that they contained the micronutrients, the vitamins. You take out one, you're taking out a plethora of vitamins. And it's still going on today. It is driving me nuts because no diet that I've come across so far in the 40 years has helped obesity, diabetes, heart disease, mental health, digestive disorders, which on the contrary, they seem to be on the rise. And I want to propose that maybe the battle of the macronutrients and us having a negative food relationship is causing its own stress. It's causing its own dis-ease. And I know there's a plethora of other reasons, but it's not helping. The true meaning of the word diet comes from the Greek word dieta, and it means a way of life. And I don't think that our diets feel like a way of life. So I want us to knock it off, get rid of this battle of the macronutrients, and maybe even adopt a flexitarian way of eating. I'm not against vegetarian. I'm not against somebody's path, but I want them to embrace it and not have resentment of one food to the other, if that makes any sense. So that's really important to me. In my own journey in this, I learned also, I guess we'll say on a mental way, that we will have these lessons in life that have nothing to do with our diet, of course. And it starts the beginnings of me understanding emotional eating or emotional relationships with other areas of our life where we end up replacing it with food, alcohol, scrolling, shopping, not golfing, Juliet, not golfing. But anyway, because that's a good thing. That's a good thing. At the end of the day, I learned through my own trials and tribulations that there was something missing by just focusing on the diet. And it seems like duh, but I was so entrenched in this world that I thought it was just as simple as saying, eat this and not that, and you'll be fine. And then I ended up with my own health journey. I ended up with a lump on my pituitary gland and my thyroid gland. I've had my thyroid taken out. And if anybody knows about those, they're the mothership of hormones. And so I was experiencing a hormonal imbalance like crazy cray cray, where my body thought it was in pregnancy and menopause at the same time. And that is no word of a lie. So now here I am as a dietitian trying to promote this message of impact, and it's not working because I'm feeling like a fraud. I don't even have the energy to do it. All I know is something's missing. And then comes along this guy. Still seeing the slides? Yes. She's speaking. I don't hear Juliet though. Seeing the slides. All right. Thank you, Dorothy. Okay. And Dorothy, you know
There's
this gentleman.
I'll speak up. There's a message. You have a reminder that we are seeing.
Oh, thank you. So this dude, who now you can really see full screen, he is my husband. I don't think that he looked very good here, so this is not a proud picture, just so you know. He's in a scooter. We're in Vegas. He looks happy. He is not a happy guy. He is in a scooter because he has gout badly at this point. If you don't know what that is, it's a painful disease of the joints. He's not able to really walk. Have you ever done Vegas with somebody who cannot really get around mobility wise? And I am somebody who loves to walk. He also has high cholesterol, high blood sugars at this point, high blood pressure badly. He is 8 years younger than me. And I'm feeling like the writing's on the wall. I'm going to be a widow. And I think to myself, I'm not impacting him. I have my own health concerns going on. Something is missing. So to the best of my knowledge, I thought about retiring. I even tossed in the towel, so to speak. If you can't beat them, you join them. So I began to whine with wine in the hot tub, thinking, I guess I did all the right ways at this part of the half of my life. And so on this half of my life, I'll just have fun. But it was starting to catch up to me as well. So I was starting to see my own troubles and trials and diagnoses. I ended up in a conversation with someone, and I'll just kind of quicken that part of the story. I ended up becoming a life coach. And it was becoming a life coach that I discovered that there was something that was to the root of what's going on here. And often underneath it all, it has a lot to do with fear. Hence why I'm starting off the very beginning talking about we want to spin the connotations around food and not have battles, negative relationships, fear undertones in our eating, and many other aspects of our life. I'm going to niche into our food because most that are here are entrepreneurs and most that are here are writing books. I'm going to weave that in as well. But just for a moment, besides that, everyone walking on this planet, whether that's their endeavor or not, they need to eat. We all need to hydrate. So there's no exemptions, no matter who you are, because you might have families, you might have spouses like I do. And it's important that we see it as a one message, I feel. So there was a study done on cats. You're going to see I like cats, and they weave throughout my presentations. And they were eating while being x-rayed. And the x-rays were showing very normal digestive systems. You know, the organs and their heart and diaphragms were doing what they were supposed to be doing until they brought a dog into the room. And it was upon that that they began to react more emotionally. And in fact, more like this cat. So that everything was on alert. You might hear a dog in my office, by the way. They're on alert, and under x-ray there, you could see their diaphragms were starting to collapse. Everything's fluttering, and you can imagine heart racing and so forth. Diaphragms are to the point where some of them are vomiting. So I'm thinking, while watching this study, it occurs to me, and it's not like rocket science. You could probably put the pieces together like I am. If we're eating while under distress, what is our system doing? While watching the news while somebody else is in distress? What about when we're skating across the floor, eating a forkful or two and putting the plate in the dishwasher? Or driving in traffic while eating and frustrated? And the list goes on. What about eating at the computer? How is our system reacting if it's not also in at least some distress? Unless your mind is very attuned to keeping everything calm and happy on the way of how we will properly digest. And I'll elaborate on that. And what I learned more about this fear and the sabotage is that First off, fear is not something that's going to go away. You might be thinking about deadlines of writing your book. You might be thinking about the things that you could talk to somebody else about they don't have that particular endeavor. And for you, it feels like the mammoth is coming after you. And that's how your body's operating. And yet, when you put things in perspective, it isn't. We just kind of created our own thinking, this world of stress. But at the end of the day, fear is riding the show. And you don't chase away fear, so to speak. It's like darkness. You cannot chase it away. You just turn on a light. So this is like turning on a light and taking fear and saying, okay, you're no longer the driver. You're beside me or you're behind me. And why I'm saying this to you is because we will otherwise distract. There's three things that we end up, how we deal with fear in and of itself. We usually end up distracting. We end up in dissuasion and what we call DEFCON. DEFCON is like the cat that went, "Ah." DEFCON is a military term that says your whole system is under alert because you're under fear. And that's a whole chemistry that's going to pump through your body. And I'll talk more about that. But at the end of the day, probably what we're mostly experiencing in our day to day is dissuasion or delay. And it'll end up becoming emotional eating, emotional scrolling, emotional drinking, emotional whatever. It's a distraction from the fear because we haven't learned how to deal with it. And we want to get past this fear and understand that we're sort of like an AM and an FM dial on our radio in terms of how we breathe. When we're breathing, so right now I'm going to take a deep breath through my nose and then out through the mouth as though I'm blowing through a straw. Never in history were we breathing that way and running from a mammoth. And the brain is trained to read how you breathe to know whether to switch on AM or FM. AM being, in this case, the fight, flight response. FM being rest, digest, create response. The sympathetic system, the parasympathetic system. Simply by how you breathe. It is such a simple thing. This is where I like to say small hinges really move big doors. And I don't know why we're not talking more about this, because we can calibrate our emotional system, our nervous system, to be eating one way or the other. And like the AM and FM on the radio, you cannot be on both at the same time. So just by multitasking, eating at the computer, not going for the walk, so to speak, because things are starting to get pent up, you're probably on the fight, flight response. You're in shallow breathing, fight, flight response. Or calm breathing will flip it over to the parasympathetic, rest, digest, create. The word digest is in there. It is superior for digestion because that's where hormones like serotonin are. And serotonin and oxytocin help you absorb your food better, the nutrients, those micronutrients I was talking about. This is what we should be talking about and not the battle against the macronutrients. Because I believe that if you eat under the influence of the rest, digest, create, we'll be able to eat almost anything because we'll also stop eating faster. Like we feel fuller faster. We feel that our cravings aren't just for food, Juliet, and the sugar. That it's probably stress response going on, looking for dopamine, and the whole system is on the fight flight response where there's no rationale of portions. There's no rationales of what we're supposed to eat. If you're in the fight flight response, good luck just grabbing an apple. You're probably not going to be thinking that way. And normally I would spend a lot of time just on this particular area because there's so much to say about the hormones that are involved. But I will leave you with this part. In the fight flight response, we're producing cortisol. And cortisol is a fat storing hormone correlated with heart disease, mental disorders. Again, one or the other. It's happening even in little amounts or large amounts throughout our entire day on a chronic level while eating. So I'm drawing our attention to it so that we can begin a whole new way of how we approach our food, not just the food itself, but how. As a dietitian, I've talked for years about what not to eat, but we have not talked about the how. And so I'm talking about what I call a prescription before eating. and taking in that breath, as I mentioned. And I use this acronym, the power of the pause, or pause in and of itself, as a way to prime the mind to begin eating. And so P stands for pause, and just pause and breathe before eating. Just don't dive in right away. Pause. And that A is to become aware of your emotions and your surroundings. If the news is on, if there's negativity around you, in all likelihood, you're going to be in shallow breathing. So we want to calibrate your nervous system with that breath that I mentioned, and just be aware of your emotions. What are you really craving? What's really going on? To unitask, to just focus on just food. I think some of us are afraid to do that because we don't trust ourselves, that we're going to overdo it. We're going to have a binge episode, or many of us have been privy to everything. By the way, I was born human first. So all of this I relate to. I just have learned tools to navigate. So unitasking, try not to type your last deadline page for your book while eating. It's important. It'll help with heartburn and digestive disorders too. And the S is to slow down. If you're slowing down, you're going to be able to hear the signals of fullness. And if you're full or not, you'll be able to hear if you really, really are wanting that particular item or not. That your brain is helping you if we just stop and listen. And the one that I'm most wanting to promote is that we enjoy food again, that we don't think about it as, oh, so-and-so is eating that, or I can't have that. It's different when you're doing this. It's like the inner physician in all of us will know how much and when to stop, and all of it will just come customized for you by coming into the power of the pause. I have a little bookmark or a little printout that you can QR code scan this, and you can have this reminder of the power of the pause. I can come back to this slide afterwards. In other words, I use tools that you would use at where you're eating, for instance, or at your desk, to remind you, so that we can repattern the subconscious mind to create new habits. This is something it's very important to kind of knock off the things we've been trained. In other words, who's heard this before? Eat everything on your plate because there's starving kids in the world. And yet, how on earth did that help? But you wouldn't believe how many people I am working with that is a major pattern that they're running, called a paradigm, just simply because they've been wiring and firing it for so long, up until now, we'll say. So this acronym, as I mentioned.
So can I just ask, how many of you told your parents to send your liver and onions, put them in a box and send them to Africa?
I'm a card-carrying member of that one. So in this whole endeavor, please join me. I mean, the whole idea of the true meaning of the word diet, I'm thinking this is an opportunity. We're a new generation that actually have abundance around us. That could be argued because there's people talking about food prices, and that's a whole nother topic, but not like our ancestors. I mean, my dad grew up with rationing a can of bean for 3 days. I mean, there's rationing going on that they had that I will never have experienced. They taught us to eat a certain way because that's what they knew. They came from lack and scarcity. They did not have abundance to teach us how to navigate with abundance. We are new to this, I feel. So a little bit of poetic license that we're a little bit clumsy at it. We're a bit portion distortion thinking because we come from lack and scarcity. But we do have an opportunity, I think, with this awareness, being aware of the fact that, gee, my breathing and my DNA are creating a lot of this disease on the planet. Yep, it is. So how about we install new patterns of the true meaning of the word diet and just begin this experiment, is what I'm hoping for. And that's what I wrote in my book called The Domino Diet, because if you anchor your thoughts to more positive thinking and awareness to your thoughts, the rest will domino into place. This whole business about how you breathe, you won't have to matter, because in positive thinking, you tend to be breathing more calmly. And it's your breathing that ignites your hormones. And your hormones will have an influence on your feelings. People think their feelings are what cause their cravings, but it is not. It is first your thoughts, then how you breathe, and then your hormones, then feelings. And the feelings will then influence your actions, and then everything influence your results. My medical curriculum, I mean, both sides of my medical curriculum were focused on the results, the symptoms, the pill, the diet, the symptoms, the pill, the diet, the symptoms, the pill. And we weren't going to the root. Very rarely are we going to the root causes. So I am hoping that this is a message that can start to catch fire, and we would again start to think more positively about our food again, and niche this to your own. If it's finances, if it's your relationships, but the point being, it starts with your thoughts. So I'm creating courses that are along the lines of breathe, eat, pray, love. I create different titles, as Juliet knows: breathe, pray, love. What I'm creating courses that go to the root is what I'm getting at. I bring in the idea of this whole what happened as a paradigm in the background from your growing up, or your teenage years, or just the relationship. I talk about the emotional part of emotional eating, because that's where it is. If you have a fight with your spouse, your teenager, you're worried about your finances, that's what you're eating. And if I don't talk about that with you, or you don't extract that for yourselves, we're only putting fear sort of in the driver's seat while eating, as opposed to understanding it and going to the depth of it and parking it beside us. Again, it's not going to go away. It's going to be placed in a different spot while you deal with the actual. I always do a little plug for my daughter. She teaches yoga online. We do this whole with the breathing and whatnot. That's going to help. And then I help people understand macronutrients and their calories. It's not like I brush past it. I just think it comes midway through or towards the end. It was a really difficult decision for me with my book to even put the word diet on that title, until I realized the true meaning. And then it was really difficult for me not to dive into talking about the diet right away. But it happens towards the end of my book, because I want the mind to be rewiring and firing first. So just know, however, though, I still am very passionate about speaking about the macronutrients and the micronutrients. And it is something that is unique to each one of us that may have a diagnosis, or their sugar craving is coming from maybe not spacing their meals apart properly, maybe not having enough carbohydrate intake in the first place. So there's a deeper assessment. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I do really want to look at that with individuals. Their water intake, it matters. It's not as simple as just saying, do this, however, and strategizing throughout the day. So as entrepreneurs, as you are still needing to hydrate, you know this probably, you're 70% water, but it's not a one-time deal. I'm speaking right now and I'm using carbon dioxide and oxygen, and there's water involved. My digestive system, everything, you and I are using water as we speak. So it's not a one-time deal. We have to keep replenishing it in order to have all functioning in a superior manner. So we talk about ways to be able to do that. And I sometimes put up the P chart too, so that you can distinguish the color of your urine to know if you're hydrated or not. But I thought maybe I won't do that this time. We talk about activity. I thought in weaving this in for who the audience is really important to me, because I'm no different. I sit at a desk 80% of my day, sometimes into the evening. And so I've made it a sort of a rule for myself to have what I call activity bites. After eating, to go for a small 10-minute walk, move about the house, or to do something that's 10 minutes worth of activity after eating, at least by that point, because I eat 3 times a day, and I'm hoping most do, that's 30 minutes right there. And studies show that if you are walking in increments, intermittently throughout the day versus a bolus 30 minutes. So if it's 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, it's just as effective as 30 minutes all at once. Is 30 minutes enough? Probably for disease management. The studies are showing 8,000 steps a day is actually better than it used to be. It used to be 10,000 steps, we would say, for disease management and prevention. So studies are starting to say 8,000 starting to show us some good effects. For weight release, it's often increased. But when I work with individuals, including whoever it is, like whether it's for healing, weight release, or otherwise, I have them get a sense for what they are calculating in a day. And then we challenge it to go up by 2,000 steps, because 2,000 steps is about 100 calories burned. There's 3,500 calories to 1 pound. So if I suggest 10 minutes of activity a day, even, and you're doing 100 calories burning, which is what would happen through that, by the time 30 days have lapsed, that's 3,000 calories. So I can take these little activity bites and see some effects versus the dauntingness that happens in the diet world, which makes us feel like we have to be in the gyms, we have to be on treadmills and 30 minutes or an hour. But we didn't used to have treadmills. And we didn't used to have diabetes and obesity like we do today. So I think we're underestimating some of the little wins that we can intertwined throughout the day, or call it wins, or call it activity bites, little things, small hinges that move big doors. This is I just love the color of this slide, so that's why I have it here. But also, I love talking about cravings. I like talking about how our human body speaks to us, that our bodies, when we're craving salt, sometimes it's because we're dehydrated or we're looking for potassium. When we're craving chocolate, we're maybe looking for serotonin. We're actually looking for hormonal balance, because that can definitely happen with some of our chocolates, our good chocolates anyway, or caffeine we might be looking for. And if we're looking for sugar, it could be that we're not getting enough carbohydrates, or we're spacing our meals too far apart, as I mentioned earlier. So rather than berate them, oh my gosh, I'm craving this, I actually want you to lean in and understand what's behind that. What are the emotions? Did you eat enough? And we go further into it. And if there's not enough serotonin, and there is a lot of craving for chocolate, and actually overall for everyone, I start with sleep and hydration, writing books or not. But if you were like me, when I was writing my book, I would be waking up early. I would have ideas and epiphanies. Sleep was a different kettle of fish for me at the time. And I do have times where I don't need as much sleep, but there are other times that we begin to understand how much we're missing melatonin and serotonin, which are all part of sleep. Sleep is where we rest, we digest, we actually repair. There's a lot happening with our immune system. So we want to understand why we're not sleeping. And of course, we go to the obvious first, which is caffeine. And I am not saying no caffeine. But I will look at the volume, because most adults shouldn't have more than 300 milligrams a day, for instance, and the cutoff time, because the window of time that caffeine's in our system is about 5 to 7 hours. We're a little unique depending on our hydration period, but I usually suggest somewhere around noon to 2 to be watchful of your caffeine intake for that reason. And if you're sitting at a desk and you're writing your book, for instance, that caffeine we're looking for maybe to stay awake to be able to do that is something that we want to replace with some other ideas and repattern the thinking around that too. I talk a lot and fast because I prefer the Q&A session. So I'm coming to that really quick here. But I wanted to mention that I like working with a 30-day, a 90-day, and 120-day or longer program. So I can show you my magic wands as to why. You can see here, you guys are seeing me still? Yes? This is a representation of our circulation. And this is normal blood flow. In this blood, there is a representation here of these white beads being iron, B12, oxygen, but also sugar, fat, and salt. And this is normal circulation. But we do see, and I see this an awful lot, especially in diabetes, where it thickens from salt intake, sugar intake, extra fat, not enough hydration, not enough movement. And often a diagnosis occurs, and that's when I end up seeing the individual. What is not said, however, is that your red blood cells regenerate every 120 days. So in 120 days from now, so today you just had a new batch born, and there'll be a new batch born again in 120 days. Your red blood cells are a marker of your health. When you are seeing your physician or naturopath or otherwise, often you will have blood work done to then determine your true health. That's your red blood cells. So no way in heck do I ever interpret looking at red blood cell lab data that it's a one and that's it. There's so much that can be done to now take the new red blood cells, have them eat a certain way and move a certain way and think a certain way because of the hormones, drinking enough fluids, and we can return back to our homeostasis, our normality with our red blood cells. So working with 120 days, knowing that you can influence your entire body from the inside out with most of what I've mentioned, pausing before eating, having a awareness to your portions, being active, drinking your fluids. This is my goal, to be able to do that from the inside out. Okay, I don't know if you're feeling like I'm loading you up with a fire hose, but I put my Calendly link here to be able to get in touch with me, and I can pull that slide back after with the QR code, I should say. The Cracking the Craving Code course. I'm going through it fast because I want to get to the Q&A. I don't know. I love Canva. It's my only way of being creative throughout the day because I'm not really an artsy person. So I create recipe books and blogs. And so I have this QR code here for this particular recipe booklet. It's for this time of year, which we are right now in June. So we're spring. And I'm finally seeing the barbecue season happening. So I thought I'm going to create some healthy recipes around that, prompted by Juliet as well. And I wanted to share with you that Mr. Scooter Man is no longer in the scooter. He is free of gout, normal blood pressure. He is, I don't know, the healthiest I've ever seen. And it's simply because he began to, with me, adopt a different way around food. And he started to put forward in front of him more, like, rather than focusing on the food, the emotional scrolling, the emotional drinking, the emotional eating that was happening, because he had a fear of giving himself permission to really do what he wanted to do in life, which was to sing in a band. He's still a corporate guy, by the way, I didn't mention that, but he really wanted to sing in a band, but he was scared. So he would distract himself with the food and the drinking versus getting his darn butt up on the stage and sing. Within 2 weeks of him adopting a different way of thinking and this new approach, which was what I was just learning at the time as a life coach, he started to come to me and say, hey, what could I do to be able to sing better on the stage, to look better on the stage? And I looked at him like the same thing I've been saying to you for 20 years, to eat better and move better. That would never work and never had the same impact. It didn't have the stamina, the lasting power. It would only last for maybe 2 weeks. But when he was doing it on behalf of his dream or his endeavor, it was like he heard it at a whole new pitch. And it just took off. So he lost 40 pounds and on the story goes. Finally, I don't mind being with him again. Anyway, because he's a happier guy. He was kind of getting angry. Fear was running the show otherwise. So fear's no longer running the show and he's living a happier life. We're living a happier life because of it. The emotional eating part has been, I guess we'll say, cured by the pause. So I say all that to say there is more to it, going to the roots and understanding. And all of this, believe it or not, is woven through the book. His story is woven through my book because, yeah, he was a handful. Definitely a handful. Nonetheless, there's a couple of QR codes here. One that takes you to my website, the one that's underneath my picture. And the other one is to my Calendly link to be able to book a discovery call or just to understand better what I'm saying to you. But I do otherwise welcome your questions. And I think that's what I have other slides, but I'm going to leave that, edit that because I want to get to your questions. And I think we're good timing for that anyway. It is perfect timing for that. Look at that.
It is. Really quickly, is there a URL where we can grab that download of the barbecue book?
I was going to email. I have it in my emails to put in the chat here. So I'm going to I'm just for one moment going to look for it while you can take your phones and do QR codes while I go look for it.
Okay. All right.
And then I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. I have a question for you while you're doing that. So I don't know if this is a thing, but when you move from processed foods to, raw, good for you food, do you go through withdrawals like drugs, alcohol, caffeine? So how do you alleviate Like if you're getting off sugar and you're feeling those withdrawal symptoms, how do you alleviate them and get through them?
The awareness, because not everyone knows that that's what's going on. So that they're thinking, what's wrong with me? What's up? But if they know first and foremost that they're going to experience something, there might be things that you can do that are proactive around it, though, to make sure that you're walking a bit to get the serotonin up, to drinking your fluids. So a bit of a remedy that's in place prior to just going through all the withdrawal. Like there can be things that we do in between that are in the healthy way of eating and so forth. But it's probably more rest is going to be needed, honestly, where maybe 6 hours of sleep was adequate once upon a time. I would give it more like an 8 to 9 hour window, because there's a lot of repair, rejuvenating going on, allowing for more rest for sure. And I believe in weaning. I don't really believe in I'm not saying that cold turkey doesn't work for some, but they're the rare ones. So I would be a weaning off plan that would take place, and not an all or nothing. All or nothing creates old diet patterns in the first place. Number one, sugar is not that evil. Sugar cane is natural. It actually is normal on our planet. We just overdid it. We went from it being used for some manufacturing to some small degree, and then all of a sudden, right now, there's a show on Netflix called Frosted, I think is the name.
That's so funny.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I just watched it this week. If you guys haven't watched it, it has a bunch of great comedians.
Yes, and there's messaging underneath it. And it has a lot to do with the fact that once upon a time, we didn't need mass production of sugar. Then all of a sudden, these breakfast cereals hit the market. And I'm not pointing a bunch of fingers. I'm just saying, be aware of the fact that that wasn't part of our planet before. And then all of a sudden, mass amounts of sugars were required to be able to produce these cereals and these foods that never existed for our body to all of a sudden adapt to. I'm going on a tangent here, but I think if we wean back, allowing some, because our brain does need 120 grams of carbohydrate in a day on average. Some brains here probably need more because they're firing more. Nonetheless, to cut cold turkey, I don't think is a wise way to do it. And there's some things like, these are just popping into my head, like maybe yogurt covered raisins for a little bit. There's a bit of a health component versus just sugar candy, which has absolutely nothing in terms of nutrition. Some strategies to be put in place in the meantime.
Linda, did you have a question? Oh, unmute yourself, sweetie.
I have a question after that, Juliet. So,
Okay.
But go ahead, Linda. I'm sorry.
So I wanted to say this was a brilliant presentation. What you're
Thank you.
doing is inspiring, and thank you for all of this information. So my simple question is, with dark chocolate, which is my non-guilty pleasure, I get 80% cocoa. I don't seem to be bothered to sleep at night, even if I have it at 6 o'clock. And I have maybe 3 medium-sized pieces, maybe twice a day, some days not at all. Is it different? Doesn't it have resveratrol, something like that in it, that makes it easier to digest? And my question is, it's not bothering me. The caffeine in it doesn't bother me. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so first off, the higher in percentage, usually the more cacao in it, which cacao is, I see Andy on the screen, so I bet he could probably speak a lot about cacao. Anyway, it's very healthy. Again, it's a very natural ingredient, very high in potassium, copper, fiber. The list can go on. It's a very healthy ingredient, not to be eaten as a supersized chocolate bar, but as you are doing, that's great. The amount of caffeine that's in 3 squares is roughly about probably 25 to 30 milligrams. To compare that to my cappuccino, which is probably about 100, maybe 80. And a normal cup of coffee being about 70, maybe milligrams. A Red Bull is about 100.
Wow.
And a Monster is about 300. So there's such a varying amount of caffeine, and the amount that you probably are used to it. You've come to a place. I noticed when I hit menopause that I all of a sudden had lesser tolerance to caffeine, and I still have 2 cups, but it's done by 2 for me.
Yeah.
Other people, it's noon. So you at least know you sleep well. You're probably getting a bit of serotonin out of that. I think it's a great incorporated item into your, potassium's the other ingredient that's great in there. I mix it into trail mixes. I think it's perfect ingredient not to take away.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Christine?
Yes, I'd like to address this issue of people taking the GLP-1 injections, and it's very prevalent on TV, where you see a man injecting into his abdomen, this wonder drug to release weight, or a woman in the thigh. You see it on the ad, and then they promote this in various ways. And I just read research that said the people who are taking these drugs, say for a year, gain the weight back afterwards. So I was wondering what you think about the use of this, and what would you say to somebody who is intending on taking this drug?
Well, I have a specialty in diabetes, and that's kind of where it all sorts of originates, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Ozempics, if people don't know the other
Yes.
name for it.
Mm-hmm.
So over my entire career, I always went to, even in the health food store industry, what is the risk benefit ratio? Because some things that are natural are can be harmful as well. So first of all, I'll look at the risk benefit ratio. If I'm looking at somebody who has risk after risk after risk after risk due to the obesity, due to the diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
it might be worth exploring. And I say that very, very lightly, because usually I will always want to go to the foundation first
Mm-hmm.
of, did you try eating this, and that? And did you try walking?
Mm-hmm.
And did you retrain your mind to be ready for the person that is releasing weight? If you do not train your mind, I have a chapter in my book called What Do Honeymoons, Lotto Winners, and Weight Release Have in Common? Honeymoons end. You know what I'm getting at?
Yes.
We have to have a mind that is ready for that, or it will not stay. We will self-sabotage it. Okay, so there's that. What is so funny is I have worked with people that require insulin, and I'm not going to take away from that, because if you're type 1 diabetic, you will die if you do not have insulin. There is no lifestyle replacement for that. And I remember many times with our type 2 diabetic population that insulin might become required, and they were absolutely not, because it required a needle. Now they're kind of glorifying the needle idea, and it is driving me a bit nuts, because it's again going to the diet pill symptom, now Ozempic injection, no different, not going to the root. So that's a long answer for you, I think, but at the end of the day, it will come back on if you go off of it, because you didn't go to the root cause to why seeing the weight gain in the first place, or the diabetes in the first place. And there is a risk in some of these, absolutely. But there's a risk in the metformin that some of our diabetic population's taking, and on and on and on that list goes. But their sugars going high is a higher risk, period. So sometimes we need like a life jacket to help us keep afloat.
Yes.
You get my metaphor, until we can get everything else under management, and then the risk comes down and we can take them off medication.
Okay.
I guess we'll say that's called integrated medicine in that sense.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Dorothy?
Yes.
Dorothy.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I have a tendency, I'm not sure whether it's whenever I eat, about an hour, maybe 2 hours afterwards, and especially if I'm listening to something like this, I must relax or something, I want to go to sleep. What is that about?
So you're saying that after about an hour or two after eating, and you're listening to something, that you feel sleepier,
Yeah.
but not beforehand?
No.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. One of which is, I'm assuming you're going into the rest, digest, create zone. If that's the case, this is kind of not terrible, because you're in the rest, digest, create. On the flip side, sometimes what's happening is when we're eating things, and normally with carbohydrate, and I'm not trying to make carbohydrate bad here, I'm just saying, as we're eating carbohydrate, insulin's also required. And sometimes a little bit too much insulin for some of us. We're producing a little bit too much insulin that overrides the amount of carbohydrate that's coming in, and it can kind of feel like a low sugar.
Okay.
That requires some experimenting and working together and things like that. And I know you, Dorothy. So extracting that would be doing some experiments, like what happens if I have 1 cup of rice with protein and veggies as opposed to 2 cups? Do I have the same symptoms? Okay, what happens when I have half a cup? So there's some experimenting that I do to find out if it is to do with the insulin, because we cannot measure insulin on a regular daily basis. And unless you're diabetic and have a glucometer, it's called a sugar meter, it's hard to know if your sugars are going up. And that's the other thing I would be looking at. And as you know, I have my feelers always out for that with people because that's my specialty. You bet.
Well, you guys, thank you for showing up today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you got something out of it. You know how to get in touch with Karie if you have, I know a couple of you are already working with her, but you know, her book too. If you really want a funny book that's not all diet, 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 she has a great sense of humor in there. Her chapter heads will make you chuckle, especially the ones that you like, oh my God, that's me. So, you know, check out her book, The Domino Diet. Karie, did you find that URL for the barbecue?
Oh, for the barbecue, I did not. Sorry about
For the
that. I did
yeah, for the barbecue
Calendly.
booklet. Yeah, so these guys can grab a copy if they want it. I've already seen it. It's got some good stuff. That's why I asked her to share it on the call, because it's a great download for, you know, when you're looking out there for those things to build your platform, you're always looking for that great download. This is one of them to build your list with. So did you find it?
I can grab it quickly. If there's another question in the meantime while that happens, sorry, I misunderstood.
Let's see.
I had an observation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in relation to the pause and just what a social factor eating is. And so those of us who live alone and eat alone, eating is such a different thing. But I also notice when I attend webinars or things that the host invites people to go ahead and eat during that time. I am not hungry. I wouldn't normally eat during that time, but there is one class I take and everybody, it's like as soon as they get on, they just start stuffing their face and all of a sudden I'm starving. And so I think also just kind of that whole environment of what you surround yourself with. You know, you're not hungry when you go to the mall, but you smell the food court and all of a sudden there's French fries on your plate. So
We have this DNA that is all about survival and socialization and connection. There's so much I can go into about wanting to fit in with the herd as part of it. That's what you're experiencing. It's like a yawn, though, too, is kind of contagious. So
yeah.
I don't know. I cannot do that while watching because I don't know. It looks messy or something.
Yeah, I don't like
Not to mention-
participating, but I feel the hunger in something that normally that's not my eating time. Why do I think I need to graze?
Well, on a scale of 1 to 10 with the hunger scale that I use, sometimes it's called thirst. Thirst around a 3 or 4 hunger level. It's actually, you're probably thirsty. So that's one remedy because I'm feeling a little hungry right now. And we need our water intake. So may as well use that excuse at the time.
Great. You guys, hopefully you grabbed that link inside of there. And thank you all for coming. Next month is Allie B. Berthume. I can never say her name. It's French. And obviously I'm failing French. And she's going to be talking about book development, authenticity, which I think most of you have written your books, but tell your friends about it that want to write books. She works closely with Chris Johnson. So, you know, you can reach out to Chris if you want to know more too about book development. So thank you. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye for now.